Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Psychology of Change webinar. My name is Caitlin Futch, and I am a marketing specialist at the Myers-Briggs Company. Today's webinar will run for approximately 1 hour, so please feel free to submit any questions using the chat function at any time throughout the presentation. Please note this webinar is being recorded, and we will be sending out an email with a link to the recording as well as the slides within the next few days. So now I'm happy to introduce our speaker, Dr. Rachel Cubas-Wilkinson, Principal OD Consultant from the Myers-Briggs Company's Professional Services team. Rachel is passionate about people development, self-awareness, and leadership. And Rachel leads the consultancy services for the Myers-Briggs Company, and her team partners with organizations of all types to develop staff and leaders and to resolve people development challenges. Rachel holds a doctoral degree in transformative leadership from the University of New England and received her master's degree in leadership and a graduate concentration in adult learning methods, curriculum, and instruction. So welcome, Rachel, and I will turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Caitlin, and welcome everybody. Let's jump right in. I'm super excited to be talking to you today about the psychology of change. Again, as Caitlin said, don't worry about profusely taking notes as you look at a slide because you will have a chance to actually get those slides afterwards. However, I will say right now, let's be mindful of the fact that I'm going to try to keep this a little bit interactive. So as you're toggling other windows, as you're having other things come up on your screen, there'll be times where I might call you back over so that we can be a little bit interactive. Let's actually start that off right now. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask you, how would you complete this sentence? Change is. And I'd like you to use the chat function. Go ahead and type in the chat function. How would you complete this sentence? Change is. All right, so let's see how one person completed this sentence, change is. I'll give you a very interesting way of completing it, perhaps a little unconventional, but nevertheless true. Robert completed this sentence as change is inevitable except from a vending machine. So let's keep talking a little bit about change. And here's the next thing that I'd like you to do. I'd like you to just humor me for a second. As you're sitting at your computer there or wherever you might be, I'd like to ask you to cross your arms, just in the most relaxed, natural, comfortable way as you would usually do. Just get really comfortable as you would naturally do it. And then now what I would like you to do is uncross your arms and cross them the other way, the way that you didn't cross them before specifically. And here's what I'd like you to think about, just kind of on your own. I'd like you to think about what that was like for you specifically. It was such a small change. It was a very small request that I made, but even within that very small change, there were many of you who probably went along with me, humored me, and I appreciate that. You helped me kind of prove the point that I'm about to make right now. And then there's others of you that are probably thinking, why on earth should I make this change? I'm not even sure I want to engage with this change because I don't understand the why of it. And kind of the point of what we wanted to make here is this first truth about change is the fact that change is experiential. We often talk about change as kind of a construct, but the truth is it's something of an experience. At times it's cognitive, at times it's a physical change that we're making, like what I just asked you to make. Other times it's psychological, other times it can be pretty emotional, or really all of the above specifically. And it's important to remember that no two people, no two of you that did this with me had the same experience in change. Let's do one more of these before we kind of kick off. And that's, let me ask you this question. Who would you rather be in this picture? Feel free to locate the chat box and go ahead and let me know, would you be team orange or would you be team blue in this skydiving picture? And I know some of you are thinking, oh, Rachel, I'd be neither, right? I would not be skydiving at all. But let's just pretend for a moment that both you and I are incredibly courageous and daring and adventurous. What team would you be? Would you be team orange or team blue? And now let me see if giving you a little bit of new information would actually change your perspective or your answer. A little bit of new information comes along. So ordinarily, I would be team blue, but obviously in this case, I think there's enough information to push me into team orange. And what this is about is really just kind of reminding us of this next truth about change. And that's the fact that change is not only experiential, but it's experienced individually. So what is a very small and a minor change for one person can be actually a pretty dramatic and sometimes even catastrophic change for somebody else. And it's the first thing that I really want you to keep in mind when we talk about organizational change, because one of our temptations is to sort of quantify change and to say, okay, this is a small change, everybody should just kind of go along with it, or everybody should be able to jump on the bandwagon. This shouldn't be super disruptive. And we even begin to ascribe whether somebody should be emotional or bothered by a change or not based on how big or small of a change we think it is. So we say, this person shouldn't be upset, it's such a small change. The truth is, change is experienced very individually, and we're going to see that peppered throughout the presentation today in a little bit more nuance and specificity. So the mission of the Myers-Briggs Company is to inspire everyone to lead more successful and fulfilling lives. And personally, I think that this mission fits really well with the theme of the psychology of change, because we're going to explore today reactions to change and dynamics of how change can impact us and how we might draw insights from personality and personality awareness to help us lead more successful and fulfilling lives. So how are we going to go about doing that? Basically, here's the roadmap for the next few minutes that we have together. We're going to explore factors to consider during times of change. Next, we're going to actually experience change through a simulation. Then we'll do a very brief walkthrough of one institution's major change initiative and how we partner to support them. And then with any time that we have left, we'll also look at key takeaways and some Q&A. As Caitlin mentioned, though, if you have any questions along the way, don't lose those. Go ahead and chat them into the questions box of the GoToMeeting platform there so that you can make sure and capture that and we can see what your question is. Ultimately, what I'm hoping we will all walk away with in this investment of your time is with a deeper appreciation of how change can be successfully navigated through the power of psychological insight. Let's go very briefly into this idea of drivers of change. So is it any wonder why so many of us and so many of the organizations that we represent are facing and dealing with change when it's coming to us really from so many different directions? We have, for example, technology, right? That's a big one that comes to our mind. Technology transforms the way we work. It drives the development of new products and improved products. It reshapes business processes. And it's this push, right, for continual convenience, continual access. If I apply this just to myself, I've traveled quite a bit in my career, and I remember the times when airports were designed for privacy and they were designed for rest. And lounge chairs would be kind of grouped and huddled in different places of the airport so that you could find a few moments of silence, a few moments of solitude before your flight. Now, airports have been redesigned so dramatically over one of the most valuable commodities that we can now find in an airport, and that's the electrical outlet. And you see people huddled around them and sometimes charging 1, 2, maybe 3 or more devices specifically. Total game changer with technology, even how the way our airports are designed. I also remember in all my travels how difficult it's been to find time to get to a bank just to be able to pay bills, deposit a check, withdraw money, etc. Well, ever since the smartphone, all of the apps of banking, the ability to do a mobile deposit on my phone, the ability to have artificial intelligence through my app anticipate what my needs are, I can't remember the last time I went into a bank. And I'm actually looking forward to the time when my 3D printer can actually print some cash for me too, so that I don't have to go to the bank even to be able to withdraw cash. There's also a lot of change that's happening organizationally specifically, things that sometimes are really quite out of our control: reorgs, mergers, acquisitions, rapid downsizing, re-strategizing, where organizations, because of change, because of external factors, are oftentimes having to reinvent themselves completely, become a totally new company, change their operational efficiency, take really strong looks at the way they approach business, and that brings a tremendous amount of change. And then, of course, there's the way that we work. It's changing. And this very moment where you and I are in, where we're joined together, geographically distributed throughout the United States and abroad, throughout different time zones, and we're coming together in a synchronous moment virtually, is evidence of that. It's evidence of the fact that we're moving towards a virtualized work environment more than ever before. I don't know if you were in it, but I think I did a webinar for the Myers-Briggs Company that you can look up about the changing space of place and work, where we looked at the fact that communication through virtual means, like telecommuting, like conferences like this, are actually outpacing the number of interactions that we have in a face-to-face or traditional environment, even when your employees and your colleagues are sitting right next to you, even when you're co-located in the same office. And that doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of how the way we're moving into project teams and project-based work and all of that we've been hearing about for so many years. So it's really no wonder why change is happening so constantly. But here's an important truth to take from that, and that's the fact that employees are asked to change constantly. And it's interesting to me that I had my start in my career in human resources, and I've reviewed more resumes and hired more and sifted through more of them than I care to count. But there were so few times where the skills that were being looked for in a resume included something like adaptability or openness to change, or there were times where interview questions never asked an employee, tell us about a major change you went through and how you reacted to it. What was your stance? How did it go? What worked well for you? It's interesting to me that it's become sort of a constant for every employee, but even hiring practices are still kind of outpacing and not keeping up with that. And so all of this leads to more of an experience of change. And here's where I want us to become super interactive, actually. So about experiencing change, I want us to do a little bit of a business simulation. And here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I know it's pre-Christmas. I know you're tempted to be on Amazon.com right now looking up the best deals. But if you can humor me for the next 5 minutes and toggle over back to the GoToMeeting platform and walk through this simulation with me, it would be super helpful. So what I'd like us to do is, I'm going to ask you to participate as a key employee of a growing company. This company actually specializes in personal beauty, grooming, and fashion products. And here's the company. It's BestProductsofAllTime, Inc. I've put here their information just in case it kind of triggers your memory, but you probably know them best because of their revolutionary product, Smart Socks, with embedded Bluetooth technology and tracking so that you never lose a sock again. Personally, I have many of these and I've won the battle against the dryer with my socks. And what I would like you to do is I'd like you to help me out, because we're about to go into a end of year 2019 shareholders meeting. And I just got that dreaded last minute email from one of our board members where they said, all of the agenda looks great, but we also want you to highlight for us what's going to be the 2020 product line. We want you to get us excited about it. What are we coming out with? What's new? What's going to bring in more revenue for the company? What's going to engage more customers? And so what I'd like to ask you to do is I'd like you to ask your help to lead that very brief pitch for the shareholders right now. So you're going to actually write a quick pitch based on this 2020 product line. So let me walk you through what that product line is. We're announcing, and super happy to announce right now, these 2 new products. Product number 1 is flex and fitted trousers with new Keep Your Pants technology that lets you go up or down 3 sizes with patented micro memory fibers that mold to you. Perfect for the holidays, perfect for that January time where we all know the sizes do matter after around holiday time. The second product is a smart messenger bag. This is with revolutionary keep your stuff technology with built-in anti-theft alarm. For any time your bag is separated from you 50 or more feet away, it will siren an alarm so that you can actually go and get your bag and not forget it, or worse, have it stolen from you. So what I'd like to ask you each to do individually is I'd like you to take the next few minutes and I'd like you to write out just whatever comes to your mind of a 60-second customer story where the customer, a potential customer, is engaging with these two new products. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to share some of those here, and you're going to present those to the shareholders in just a couple of minutes. And for those of you who say a 60-second story, I have no idea, I've never written a story before. A story is just simply three things. It's a scene, where is it happening? It's a subject, who's in it, who's it happening to, or who's doing what, and a situation. What are they actually engaging in? What's happening in that situation? So you just kind of paint us a picture, 60 seconds or less, where a consumer is using these two new products. The caveat is because we got that dreaded last minute email, you have 5 minutes. And then I'm going to open it up to have a couple of you share with us what your 60-second story was. And who knows, we might discover some marketing marvels here in just a few minutes. So we're going to go quiet for a few seconds while I give you a chance to write this out and you prepare to share some of your brilliant ideas. Of course, if you have any questions, please chat those now. Okay, folks, I'm really sorry to do this to you, but I've had a last minute change again from the shareholders specifically. So here's what I just got. It looks like they wanted this pitch, they wanted this 60-second intro specifically to the products, and now all of a sudden I think they want something else. So let me just show you the email and what it is that they want specifically, and we'll kind of go through it together. So here's the email from our stockholder. The go-to market pitch story sounds cool, but we're thinking that instead of the pitch, what we want is we want a business reason for the products, so for the two products, and what percentage of the total new revenue each of those products is going to provide in the first year of market penetration. So I'm totally sorry. I know that this is kind of sudden, but I need you to kind of shift gears, help me come up with a justification for these two products that we went to market with, the flex and fitted trousers and the smart messenger bag with anti-theft technology, and kind of take a stab at, of all the new revenue that we hope to take from it, what percentage might be from those two products. And unfortunately, the shareholder meeting is still now in 2 minutes. So you have about 1 minute to do this for me, but just come up with something. I know you're going to do great. And please use the chat function versus the question function so that we can kind of all see what you start to come up with. Okay, guys, let me call time on that right now. And obviously, thank you so much for going through that sort of journey of play with me for just a brief moment here. I want to kind of debrief this a little bit and just kind of ask you, on top of the fact of why on earth I made you go through this, which we'll certainly unpack in just a little bit. Here's what I'd like to ask you. Use the function there to type this answer in. What was your reaction to this change, to being given that initial prompt for the quick storyline of the 2020 products, and then having to change specifically to a very different prompt around market penetration and justification for the products? Or maybe you want to tell me just what was the impact for you personally? And go ahead and type those in, and I'm going to ask Caitlin to start kind of reading off to me some of what comes in. So what was your reaction to going through this change? What was the impact for you personally?
All right, so I'm definitely seeing a lot of frustration, confusion with expectations, feels like a waste of time. I see some people putting pressure. I see quite a few people putting that they felt really pressured with that and with the change of priorities. And oh man, yeah, a lot of people are saying frustration, have not enough time with the change being announced and the meeting being so soon. So I think in general the top three would be frustrated, confused, and pressured.
I love that. And thank you all for being so completely honest. On your own, what I want you to think about is I want you to think of a change that you've gone through at an organization where you felt that, where you felt frustrated, where you felt a time crunch, where you felt expectations were unclear, where your needs of what you needed to produce something successfully were just not being met. We all know that everybody on this call is fully capable of coming up with that 60-second pitch, and probably a really compelling one. You're also equally capable of coming up with justifying reasons for a new product line. But one of the things that I didn't do as sort of this leader of the organization guiding you through is I gave you no insight as to the reasons for the change, no accommodation to give you additional time. I intentionally gave you less information than probably made a lot of you comfortable. You certainly had less time, so how many of us know what it's like to work under time pressures at work specifically? But when it happens during times of change, it's like it's augmented specifically. And then I don't know if anybody chatted this, but why would I ask you to come up with a justification for our 2020 products when I didn't give you the decision-making power to come up with what those were? They were mine, right? They were my baby. I came up with those products because I think trousers that would go up 3 sizes or down would be so perfect for me right now. I personally want that product. And if any of you have marketing dollars and research and development dollars to go for it, I would totally back that up specifically. But this is what happens in organizations, right? We're often asked to come in after the fact, and we're asked to make sense of somebody else's decision. We're asked to justify and create market reasoning, or processes internally, or then worse, we as a leader of the organization are then asked to convince our team, our direct reports and our team members of why we should get behind these products specifically, why we should get behind this change. And all the while, folks like me who are oblivious to what your needs might be during times of change, as I was acting like in the leader of this organization, aren't meeting your individual needs in times of change, but I'm asking you to still kind of run with it, right? So a lot of frustration, and thank you so much. And what was the point of that? Was the point of that exercise to prove to you that most people hate change? Is that even true? The truth is that that's not true. We change all the time. We change our hairstyles, we change our clothing, we change the manner that we choose to come across to others. We change boyfriends, we change partners, we change where we work, where we live, right? We look for promotions or changes on the job, or sometimes we look for new organizations to work with. I know that we look for change even in things like standing in line all night long before Black Friday to get that new piece of technology. So the truth is, it's not that we hate change, right? It's just that how we feel about a change can actually change from change to change. And I know that anybody who's an English major just cringed at that sentence. But anybody who experiences a change, the truth is that most of us, if we're honest, would say that we would like to have more ownership in change than sometimes we're afforded, as you were in this business simulation. So let's look at those kind of very, very quickly. There's two types of change mostly that we look at in the research. There's intentional change. This is where you're kind of the decision maker. You're in the driver's seat and you are making a conscious and a considered decision. Maybe you're making a decision with a very clear vision in mind. Maybe you want to solve a problem. Maybe you want to provide an opportunity. Maybe you want to create a future reality that isn't there just yet specifically. But then again, there's also imposed change. And this is actually where most of the change organizationally happens to employees. And that's where we are not the decision makers, and the change may feel sudden and abrupt. It may actually create problems for us, even though they were intended to solve problems, and it may be completely disruptive to what we thought was the future, what we thought was our current reality, disruptive to routines and procedures. So if we actually juxtapose these two, intentional and imposed change, and I show you kind of the outcomes of both. So let's zoom in on the outcomes. Intentional change can lead to motivation, energy, and commitment, being inspired and committed to a change. Whereas imposed change can actually be quite detrimental. It can be demotivating, it can lead to resistance, or it can even lead to resentment. So I ask you, just kind of on your own, which one would you prefer? Would you prefer to be part of an intentional change or an imposed change? And I think there's a lesson here for organizations. And regardless of what level of power and leadership you have at the organization where you are, anytime you're supporting someone in change, wherever you're able to afford ownership, that may actually influence someone's response to change pretty drastically. And if you ask me, if I asked any leader that I've worked with in the past, would you like your staff to be demotivated, resistant, or resentful, or would you like them to be inspired and committed to the change? I think that's a pretty easy answer. So how do we successfully navigate all of this change? We looked at drivers of change. We looked at how change is experiential, how it hits us emotionally, cognitively, psychologically. How do we navigate all of this? There's a truth that I've discovered with a lot of leaders and organizations that I've worked with, and that's the fact that this is how they think change plays out in an organization. So change has to do a lot with adoption, a lot of driving employees to adopt and become part of a change, buy into a change. And what I find that organizations tend to believe is that there's two constructs. There's how many people have adopted the change, and then there's the construct of time, and that as time goes by, there's this natural, gradual, perfect progression of people adopting the change, of employees coming on board with the change. And the truth is, this is more like what the change experience is actually like, because change kind of breeds change. And so you may be rolling out a change at your organization and you think it's one big change, but it has so many different subset changes and layers of changes that it becomes more like a roller coaster to employees. And sometimes there's a building of momentum, sometimes there's a sitting back and enjoying a small win, but then there's that being blindsided by yet another change specifically, and it can be quite taxing on employees. So what actually does happen in reality is not this gradual, natural progression where adoption and time match perfectly, but there's actually a gap there. There's a gap in what is typically experienced where there's a lull, there's a stopping point, there's a plateau that is reached. And I guess the next question then that we have to kind of logically ask ourselves, knowing that this is the typical experience of change, and we wish it was more like this other, perfect 45-degree angle line, is we have to realize a couple of things. One is that organizations report regularly that change during execution proved more challenging than they had ever anticipated during the planning phases. How many of you can actually say, I can relate to that? No matter how much I planned, it was almost as if I shouldn't have planned in some cases, because there were so many changes that came about and I had to be so flexible and so adaptable. And so it begs this question, is it any wonder why some initiatives, so many different initiatives fail, and why so many of them also do not result in sustained change when there's really so much against us being able to sustain a change. So let's look now at some factors that actually impact change. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at it in a little bit of a quadrant framework. So we're going to look at here, looking at the columns, we're going to look at tangible factors and intangible factors. And then at the row level, at the top, we're going to look at factors at the level of the organization, at the level of the company. And then at the bottom, we're going to look at people level or personal level factors. And again, remember that you're getting these slides. So as I go through some of these, here's what I'd like you to think about, and I'm going to ask you to chat in when you get a chance, and that's think about major changes that you've gone through at your organization. Where did your organization spend most of its time planning and executing around a change? In which of these quadrants? Think about that, and I'm going to ask you to share as we go through. So the tangible factors at the level of the organization, those are things like your business strategy, your overall business goals, the broad structure of the organization, kind of your org chart type thing. These are the products and the services that you actually offer, the broad employee capabilities that you have represented on your team or those you partner to have, and even your external environment and your customers. Bringing that down to the level of the employee, of the people, this is also about what job roles are at your organization. What are the employee responsibilities? Are they reporting to the right person? Do they have the right knowledge and capabilities to be able to do their job successfully? Coming on over to the intangible column, organizational level, here we're looking at things like the culture of your organization, the leadership styles, how engaged employees are broadly speaking, and how employee loyalty is doing, if you did kind of a quick health check on that. And then at the people level of intangible factors, there's, if I'm an employee at an organization, just as you are, how committed are you to the organization? What intrinsic rewards do you find satisfying? What are the most valuable relationships you have on the job? What values do you bring to the table? And personality also. How does your personality, what personality do you bring to the table, and how much do I actually know about that as your employer, as the organization? And so here again, please go ahead and type it in the box, but where do you see most organizations spending their time when they go through launching a change initiative? I'd like to ask you, let me know there. Is it, maybe you want to tell me which column they spend most time on. Maybe you want to tell me specifically which quadrants, totally up to you. But Caitlin, let me know, what are you seeing here?
So the first handful, definitely more focused on the columns. I would say 90% of them are saying tangible for sure. And then the ones that are coming in with the personal versus organization, it's heavily organization and tangible.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And so that actually matches quite a bit of what I've heard in the consulting that I've done, in the consulting that my team has done. I think this stuff that you see highlighted in red here, that's where our minds kind of tend to gravitate when we're planning for a change. That seems to be the thing that everybody runs around saying, oh, we're about to embark on this major change, or we've acquired a new company, or we're downsizing. Let's make sure that the organizational structure is right. Let's make sure that reporting lines are correct, right? Let's make sure that the location of where employees are working is specifically correct. And unfortunately, that kind of brings us to this next truth, which is the fact that managers often naturally approach change with a focus on systems and processes. Now, I had somebody walk up to me one time after looking at this slide and saying, so are you anti-systems and processes? That's absolutely not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying here is, think of the sentence more of, to the detriment or the exclusion of what? So if my focus is on systems and processes, and I'm channeling my energy that way, and I'm directing and delegating these kinds of tangible things to employees, then that means something else might actually be lacking. Something else doesn't have my attention. Something else doesn't have my focus. Not to say we can throw all of these things out, of course. And in order for us to close that gap of time and adoption and how a change is being rolled out in an organization, we have to focus more on these intangible factors. And it sounds like, just anecdotally, that about maybe 90% of you felt like that was really not the focus of your organization. And by the way, that's not surprising. As we just mentioned before, that's not surprising to me at all. And the thing is, a focus on the intangible factors is where we can actually create some pretty sustained change, because we're helping the people side of change. So here's where we can diagnose employee development needs, and we can help employees with communication approaches, communication skills, their own self-awareness about their needs and whether their needs are being met, and whether they can ask their manager in pretty common, clear, consistent language what it is that they need. Here's where we can actually address things like employee resilience and agility, also working within structure or working within autonomy. Those are such radically different constructs that we really can't get at if we're only focused on the tangible. So then I'm going to ask you this sort of question. If I have the most perfectly, beautifully designed organizational structure, really clear job roles, perfectly written position descriptions here, I mean, just exemplary, lovely ones, but my employee commitment is low and the culture of the organization is low and is challenged, what do you think I'm going to actually accomplish as an organization? Do you think that change is going to stick? Do you think employees are going to take it in themselves and adopt it? And do you think it's going to be sustained and lasting change? Or could it be that because we're ignoring some of these intangible factors or not giving them the attention that they truly need, that maybe that's why 70% of change initiatives fail, right? We've heard that statistic before and it's staggering, but maybe this has a little bit of insight into it. And here's what I want to do from here. I want to dive into personality, because I think it's this very interesting intangible factor that we can actually get a hold of. Because you may have noticed, hey, Rachel, these intangible factors are great, but they're kind of hidden, right? They're that bottom part of the iceberg that we really can't get to. I can develop a job description, but how do I know how an employee is intrinsically motivated? How do I know how committed they are? How do I know what their values are? And so personality is actually one where we can use some pretty strong tools that I'm going to walk you through in just a little bit that will help us out. So why do I think personality is an important one? It turns out from the research that personality and how we respond to change is actually linked, which means it's worth looking at. And the myth here is that your personality is just kind of your interpersonal style or kind of what it's like to work with you, when in reality, your personality is actually far more than that. It's about the way you think, the way you feel, and the way you act on most occasions. And it turns out personality impacts things like what you're motivated by, how you communicate with others, how you approach decision-making, and how you approach and orient your leadership. And all of those things are so inherently tied to change that they have to be a compelling interest point for us specifically. But how do we get to them, right? That's the first kind of question. How do you get to that bottom of the iceberg that's so difficult to identify? And here's where the power of proven psychometric assessments comes in, because psychometric assessments help you take an objective look at that hidden part of the iceberg. They let you collect objective data about your employee needs, where the intangible stuff becomes tangible. And now all of a sudden you have data and you have an ability to quantify and understand what employees need and how you can make it actionable while you're designing your change initiative. So helping you keep people in mind while you design your change initiative, but with real data, not just we're going to say that we're going to keep people in mind specifically, right? And here where I want to focus in on is I want to focus in on the MBTI specifically. So if you have not heard of it, the MBTI is the Myers-Briggs type indicator. It's backed by 70 years of research. It's used by 89 of the Fortune 100 companies, so it's pretty popular. And what it does is it creates a very common language for you to understand yourself, understand others, and explore areas of commonality, areas of differences, areas of diversity. We use the MBTI. You might be a certified practitioner and use the MBTI in everything from one-on-one coaching to team building, leadership development, improving communication skills, and then on today's session, looking at change. What I want to do now is there's 4 areas that the MBTI looks at. The first one is ways that we direct and receive our energy, and you can either have a preference for extroversion or introversion, ways that we take in information, and you can actually have a preference for sensing and intuition. Let's focus there first. And then we'll focus on the last two after that. But I'd like you to kind of go on this journey with me a little bit. So here's what I'd like you to do. Take a look at the screen, and I'd like you to imagine that you're experiencing a change at your organization. And I'd like you to tell me which quadrant, or rather make note of it for yourself, which quadrant resonates with you the most. Now, this isn't which one could resonate, it's kind of your go-to. If you had to pick a go-to that says, Rachel, I live here, this is what I really, really need, which one would you pick? And make a note to yourself of which one resonated with you the most. Again, this is your absolute go-to, not willing to give it up. And now let's kind of explore these a little bit. So I mentioned to you ways of directing your energy, preference for extroversion or preference for introversion. This is not a replacement for the MBTI. So please, if you've never taken the MBTI, I so encourage you to do so. I did it in my sophomore year of high school, long before I ever thought I'd work for the Myers-Briggs Company, and it has been transformative, to say the least. But go on this journey with me of kind of just an exercise, kind of a mini version of it a little bit. And here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to look at the description, especially if you've never taken it before. Look at the description of preferences for extroversion or preference for introversion. And I'd like you to make a note to yourself of which one is you again. Not which one can you be, but which one is your go-to, your most natural, the most comfortable, like when I asked you to cross your arms and it just came naturally. You didn't have to think about it. And make a note to yourself there of which one resonates with you the most. Interestingly here, you might be able to begin to see the connection between personality and behavior. So for example, if we're going through a major change initiative at an organization, your employees with a preference for extroversion, they may actually have far greater desire to talk through the change, whereas folks with a preference for introversion may actually want to kind of hear from you what you have to say, go off and think about it for a little while and reflect on it and kind of see what questions come up and how it jives with their sort of internal vision. Let's continue on to this next one. So this is all about the type of how you take in information, the type of information you trust. And here again, I'd like you to look at preference for sensing on the left, preference for intuition on the right. If you had to pick a go-to that you say, this is my sweet spot, this is where I live, this is the stuff I gotta have, which one would you pick? And make a note to yourself specifically. This one's a good example of where you might hear, again, sometimes we give behavioral sort of clues to our personality during a meeting or as change is going on. So for example, somebody with a preference for sensing might want to get really deep into the details around the what, the where, the when, and the who of the change, how it's going to happen, why we're even doing it, what we've considered in the past and what didn't work in the past, and what is the reason for the change on a practical level. Whereas somebody with a preference for intuition might be very interested in the big picture why of the change, kind of the future reality that it's going to create, and maybe less interested in needing to be convinced of having to deviate from a current way of doing things, and maybe more inspired by the future reality of what can be created through the change. So now that you've done that, let me actually link these up. So these quadrants link up to your answers on your preference for extroversion and introversion and your preference for sensing or intuition. And I'd like you to just think to yourself, did this match for you? Did it match your MBTI type? And think back to that change that you went through where I had you go through that terrible exercise of the 60-second pitch that was super frustrating, and think back to whether I helped address your needs during times of change. So for example, if you like to keep things real and concrete, did I meet that need for you? If you want to be able to evolve as things go on, if you want to appreciate time to think things through, did I meet that need for you? And you're not going to hurt my feelings. Most times people do not. And that's what I was trying to showcase specifically with that exercise. And the truth here is that people have different needs during change, and there is no one size fits all. This is another reason why we use personality and proven psychometric assessments, to get closer to what your employee needs are during change, so that then your change strategy can be tailored to them and not a broad spectrum type of a change strategy. Interestingly, the MBTI not only provides us insights into your individual needs during times of change, like what we just looked at, but it also provides you insight into your leadership approach and kind of your go-to approach for leading others during times of change. So now what we want to do is we want to toggle over and wrap up the last two here of thinking and feeling, how you come to decisions and conclusions, or judging and perceiving, kind of how you approach the outside world. And again, I'm going to go ahead and show you these 4 rows. This time I'm switching it up from quadrants to rows just to keep it interesting. So take a look at these rows here. And again, tell me, how do you approach change? Structure and decisions. Which one is your go-to where you live? This is your natural go-to where you want to spend your time as it relates to a change. Go ahead and read those and make kind of a note to yourself of which one it is that resonates with you the most. And now let me go ahead and reveal what those last 2 letters of the MBTI assessment align here, in what way they align specifically. And again, I'm going to ask you here, did this make sense for you? As you were going through and you were identifying your preference for thinking or feeling, for judging or perceiving in terms of how you make decisions and how you structure and orient yourself to the outside world, did these connect for you? Did they resonate for you? And then the other thing that I'm going to ask you to think about here is, think about how you've seen this yourself when you've been led through change at your organization. Can you start to draw connections and connect some dots between leadership style of the person that was leading you through change and how they led with that natural go-to muscle? And then more importantly, was the way that they naturally led meeting your needs naturally? Did you guys actually align from a personality standpoint? And here's what can actually happen in terms of leadership approach. This is more realistic of a team. And this could be a very small leadership team. So you might have 5 line of business managers, 5 senior executives. And the truth is, in as much as there may be a common vision that unites them, their personalities are quite different. So you might have, for example, your TJ leaders. These are your leaders who focus quite a bit on structuring, on decisions, on actions. They tend to have a very clear position about the change. They may have a very confident and consistent style. Then you might have your TP leaders, which might be described quite differently in terms of having really, really high standards about the change or about the outcome of the change, but might have a very hands-off approach, a less directed, less prescriptive approach. Then you might have your FP leaders that focus quite a bit on the views of others. And their style, their leadership style might be described more as one of coaching and encouraging and having a flexible style oriented towards people. And then you might have your FJ leaders who similarly are focused on the views of others, but they may be more focused on building consensus or on figuring out what are the needs of others, involving others, making sure that everyone comes to the table, that those voices are heard, that their needs are met. And they might have a more value-based approach specifically to their leadership style. And because this is so representative of the type of diversity that there might be on your leadership team and your organization, then you have to ask yourself, number one, is this diversity a source of balance, or is it actually a source of conflict? Could it be that your leadership styles are sending mixed messages to employees? Could it be that a TJ leader, to pick on what I am, a TJ personality, could it be that we're leading with that go-to muscle and that strength, but what our employees need is something very, very different? And maybe I'm only hitting a quarter of the employees and a quarter of the employee needs. And so that becomes a very interesting truth around the fact that we can actually help leaders develop their ability to flex to meet the needs of their employees and teams. Why would you even want to flex? Because the more you meet the needs of someone during times of change, the greater the chance that they're going to adopt the change and feel part of the change. And everyone wants employees to be committed and to adopt the change and to move forward with the change. But this is kind of connected to that. This is pretty important. So what I'd like to do now is in the next 5 minutes, I'm going to walk through a really quick client example. We worked with a client who was going to launch a major change initiative, and they came to us and they said, we might need a little bit of external help here. We think that partnering with an external company would be helpful because there are things that we might not see. There are things that you can say that maybe we can't say internally, and I'm so glad that they did give us that chance to partner. So a little bit about the company themselves. The situation is they were a very successful organization. However, they had just gone through an operational efficiency audit and they needed to restructure pretty majorly. It was unclear to them when we asked what is the level of employee commitment currently to the change. They were very concerned, in fact, about employee buy-in, about morale, and they also were very clear about one thing. Nearly every leader told us, we know that this change is so important to keeping the business alive that it cannot negatively impact our bottom line and our business goals. In other words, it has to succeed, right? And here's a little bit about the profile of the company if you're interested in that. So what did we do? We actually took a multi-phase approach here. So we started out with a discovery of the people in the organizational context. Here we worked one-on-one with leaders to find out what is the goal of the change. Let's make those really clear. We issued a climate survey to figure out where employee commitment was, where their buy-in was, where morale stood, what the culture and the leadership style of the organization is as described by employees, not by the leaders. And then we also did a diagnostic of employee development needs based on their personality styles. If we know what their needs are during times of change, then we know that we can actually help employees build their self-awareness so that they can have a language to speak to their manager, to speak to their leaders, to say, it would really help me in making this change if I knew X, Y, and Z, or if you could help me connect the dots between this and this. And we also did that at the leadership development level. We figured out what was the level of alignment of the leaders and how much did they already know about flexing their behavior to the needs of others. And then we created a training plan based on that. So we moved into phase 2, where we did the design and the delivery of many on-site as well as virtual options, because some of their folks were geographically dispersed, some of their folks could come together and were co-located. And then we also did leadership development workshops that focused on how can I better meet the needs of my employees at the initiation of this change and in seeing the change through. Then we rolled out the change at phase 3. And then we came back and we did a second climate survey and we did ongoing development for the leaders and employees to make sure that it was working. And here's what the result was. The result was there was improved from climate survey 1 to 2 after the development of the employees and the leaders. There was an improved commitment and morale, self-reported by employees. There was an improved sense of understanding the reasons for the change. We remember how critical that is. Very importantly, there was reported increased trust in leadership. They felt that leadership was being more transparent and had a greater focus on employee needs. And then there was a greater sense of company commitment to employee development where they were seeing, hey, the company's investing in us. And because of that, there was stronger alignment across all of the different sides of the organization. And the truth to take away from this one is the fact that change is a process of adopting a new reality, and it includes perceptual changes, attitudinal changes, new competencies, new achievements, and people need support. Remember, you're going to get this slide, but I just wanted to highlight this for you because in a short webinar like this, we can't show the whole thing, but this is our complete process to addressing change, where we did that initial discovery, preparing to help people, and then rolling out the change. And let me just ask you, kind of, if I was sitting right next to you and you could visually point to my monitor right now and you could tell me, where do most organizations start their change initiatives? Do they start it at that, let's look at our current reality, our current context, what employee needs are, where the commitment and the morale currently stands? Do they start it at, what do the people need for change? What do our leaders need for change? Or do they usually start it at, here's what the change is, now let's roll it out? And I think this is what we find to be the most true and the most common. This is where organizations typically immediately start a change, kind of foregoing all of that initial groundwork to make sure that people needs are being met and that the intangible factors as well as the tangible factors are being looked at. And so kind of to conclude, in order for us to close the gap, to understand the real factors that are at play in this gap between what we expect to happen during change and what actually happens during change, we have to remember that the organization is not what changes. People change. It's the people that make the changes. And because of that, we need to develop people, we need to develop leaders very specifically. So I'm going to highlight just 3 key takeaways here, and then I'm going to open it up for any Q&A. So if you have questions, start typing them into the questions section now. Here's kind of the 3 takeaways that I'm hoping you walked away with and came out loud and clear today. One is the fact that change is personal, and understanding that your psychological needs using validated psychometric assessment can actually be a helpful way to objectively, quantifiably collect data to then create a plan to support people during times of change. Without collecting that data, it's much harder to create that plan. Secondly, we're not supposed to begin with the change. Do begin, however, with the context, with the leader approach, with the people on board. Think back to those intangible factors. And then number 3, change doesn't end at rollout or announcement. People need support through the change process. We need to find champions and we need to leverage their support to engage buy-in and to be able to sustain momentum. And the last thing that I'll kind of say here is, use the resources that are at your disposal. There's such a wealth of research out there around the psychology of change and what people's needs are. And there's also partners like us, like the Myers-Briggs Company, where we can partner with you with proven objective assessments with ethical methodology around collecting data about intangible factors like employee commitment, like morale, like organizational culture. And then we can help you through a process of using the right psychometric assessment to support creating that plan for how you're going to make sure that your change is not only successful, but that it's successful in a sustained type of way in the long term. With that, I want to thank you so much, and I want to ask for your questions or even just thoughts. If you don't have a question, give me your thoughts, because I'm hoping that this was a fruitful time for you, and give me either a question or give me something that you're walking away with, one thing that you're walking away with today. And Caitlin, let me know what you're starting to see from folks.
Sure. So we actually do have a few questions already. So the first question is, how would these concepts be applied in an environment of rapid cycles of change like a startup company?
So that is such a good question. And I'm going to say the fastest way that I can answer that is think of distributed leadership. If you are constantly changing and you're constantly moving as an organization, what does that mean? That means your people are constantly changing, constantly moving. And that means there's a lot of white space that your people have to fill in, and they have to figure out what to do and how to be nimble in situations where there may not be an established process, a clearly defined protocol, or a go-to, way to escalate issues. And the best thing you can do in those cases is you can distribute leadership, and you can treat leadership not as a position, but as a quality, as an attribute, and as a set of behaviors that you foster in all of your employees so that people can proactively seek to get the answers that they need. You don't know how many times I hear from people, my employees hit a wall and they don't ask for help. They spin their wheels and they don't ask for help at all. And I think that speaks to, we need to create expectations around distributed leadership and empowering folks to feel like they can go get those answers and they can proactively be leaders of their own scope and domain. I hope that helps. Caitlin, do you have anything else?
Yes, I know we're getting really close to the end, so I'm just going to ask you one more, but I think it's an important one. So the next question was, what can be done to address hurt feelings when a change was made without the support of the employees or when it wasn't clear why the change was needed?
Oh gosh, so that is such a good question. And I would say transparency and talking about it. I've had instances in my life that have been very, very painful where I've been a leader and I thought in my early 20s, I thought that being a leader meant that I controlled the reality for my employees. And it came a moment where the organization told me how many people I had to let go from my team. And I cried and cried and cried and came to the painful realization that I, as a manager, did not have all of the power to even be able to protect them and protect their roles. And all I can tell you is I had some of the most transparent conversations with my employees about where I had power, where I didn't, where I thought that I missed the mark, where I could have better served them. And I asked them, where could I have been a better boss to you, a better leader to you? And I can tell you, 15 years later, some of those employees are still my friends, not only on LinkedIn profile, but as in I get invited to their house friends, no joke. So transparency can go a really long way. And of course, people can tell if you're being authentic or not. So we want to be transparent in an authentic kind of way.
Awesome. So unfortunately, we have run out of time. So thank you all so much for attending and for participating so much. And I know we did have a few other questions. So thank you all again, and be on the lookout for a follow-up email in the next few days that will include the recording and the slides. So thanks again for attending, and have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thanks so much for spending the last hour with us. We really appreciate it. Bye-bye.